to this last session of the day. And Peter is going to introduce us to SNOMED CT. I'm eager to hear it because I always look at it as the giant beast of terminology that I'm afraid of. So I hope he can take my fears away and yours as well. So the floor is all yours, and I believe there is time allotted for questions at the end.
Yes.
Right? All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Peter Groves-Williams. I'm a technical specialist with SNOMED International, and this is an introduction to SNOMED with FHIR. Right, let's gauge the room here. Can I see everybody's left hand? Show me your left hand. And now tell me how well you know FHIR. Do you know it a little bit? Do you know it medium, or do you know it a lot? Quite a lot of FHIR here. Right, now keep that hand up and show me your right hand. How well do you know SNOMED? Is that a little or a lot? Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure how many people saw Dion's talk just before this one. Were there many people at that one? No. Well, he did some great, it's all right. Just some nods will be fine for that. He did some great coverage of the terminology resources and operations. So I'll try not to repeat so much of that. So, oopsie, come here. Right, SNOMED International is a not-for-profit organization. It's supported by 48 member countries, and Jamaica was the last country to join, and France is hopefully going to join us by September this year. SNOMED CT is the most comprehensive and precise clinical terminology in the world, at least that's our tagline. We cover disorders, body structures, procedures, substances, organisms, devices, and quite a lot more. And that's underpinned by some fairly solid computer science. So it's an ontology. It's a polyhierarchy, which means each term, each object can actually be many types of things at the same time. This is unlike classification, like the taxonomy of plants and animals, or ICD, when a particular thing must only be in one bucket at a particular time. So if we were to model platypus, for example, we could say that it was both a mammal and an egg-laying feature at the same time, and venomous. It could be all of these things and not need its own classification all to itself. Okay, so the international edition is published every month. Other countries publish extensions to that at their own time. They're coming on, most of them every 6 months. They're coming around to publish monthly as well. Some of them are thinking about that. And we generally add about an average of 800 concepts every month at the moment. So here's our learning objectives for today. If we get to the end of this session and you feel you've not achieved your learning objective, or if I've not explained it properly, please do come and see me anytime this week. So the first learning objective about how terminology and information models work together, SNOMED, of course, being the terminology I'm thinking of, and FHIR being the information model that we're looking at today. SNOMED is really like a dictionary. And when we're having a conversation, we all need to agree what words mean. Otherwise, our conversation is going to be very confused. At the same time, we'd like to have a large vocabulary. So we just don't go around saying that, oh, that's nice, that's bad. We want to be able to be quite expressive about it. But if we were to put those words into a random order, the conversation would be equally meaningless. So we need to have some grammar. We need to have some structure about how those words are conveyed. And that's really where an information model like FHIR would come in. So these two really work hand in glove to communicate meaning. And that is learning objective number 1 covered. Second learning objective is understanding the logical structure of SNOMED CT. Just about everything in SNOMED is a type of component. So it will have a unique identifier, an effective time, and that time changes every time you make a change to the component. Module ID that tells you who the last person to update that component was, and an active flag. Now, we never delete anything that's been published in SNOMED. We would just inactivate it, so it would still be there for historical purposes. So the component is an abstract class in computer terms. The concrete classes are description, concept, and relationship. And hopefully you can see maybe you can't. The cardinality there suggests that a concept must have at least 2 descriptions. And in terms of relationships, an active concept would have at least 1 relationship. Could have many more. There's no limit to the number of descriptions or relationships that a concept can have. So let's look at each of those in turn. That is not my screen. Boom. The concept. So concept is really the central unit of work for SNOMED. And concept is a bit like its dictionary definition. It's just an idea of a thing. And it has a unique identifier, which is up to 18 digits long. And it is linked to a fully specified name. And the fully specified, like a number on its own means nothing. So really the fully specified name, or FSN, is the meaning of the concept. And in the sense that it's locked to it, we wouldn't change the fully specified name. If there was some minor grammar or technical error, you might tweak it, but generally a fully specified name will not change. If you find out that that is the wrong name for the concept, we would inactivate that concept entirely and replace it. Right, descriptions. An FSN is a type of description. You can also have synonyms, which are up to 255 characters long, and text definitions as well, which can be up to 4K in length. So one of those descriptions in a particular dialect will be marked as the preferred term. So in this example here, the US preferred term would be appendectomy. And there's another synonym which would be considered acceptable in American English, but it's the preferred term in British English would be appendicectomy. And then we have translations in various languages. Now, a country extension will not generally translate the FSN because, well, it's not what you would display in a user interface. So we'd have preferred terms in Danish there. And although the Spanish terms at the bottom, they have translated the FSN. Okay. Oh, the FSN at the end has a little word in brackets there. That's called the semantic tag. And that's used to ensure that the fully specified name is unique. So it's not generally shown in a user interface unless you're working with the terminology directly. And it will give an indication of what major hierarchy your term appears in. Okay. So concepts will have a number of relationships. An active concept will have at least 1 relationship, which tells you what parent it has, and then it will have a number of attributes as well. So the ISA, and that's the funny thing about SNOMED, is everything is a concept in SNOMED. So even the ISA relationship itself is a concept. So the ISA relationship tells you what the parent is, and then we'll have a number of attributes into other relationships. And those relationships can be grouped together if there is semantic meaning and for example, the action that you're performing on a body site and the body site itself will be grouped together. Okay. So this is the model diagram for appendectomy. There's a lot of meaning in the various symbols here, but something that's very interesting is these 3 bars looks like an auspicious or lucky I Ching symbol. And that shows that this concept is sufficiently defined. And what that means is that any other concept that I put in, which I say is a type of procedure that has these 2 attributes here, a procedure site on the appendix and a method of excision, anything else that features those 2 attributes will, when we classify it, when we make inferences, it will become a type of appendectomy. And the inferences are made by a computer program called a classifier, and that's one of the real strengths of SNOMED, is that when we create a concept, we run the classifier over it, and it will find the correct place in the hierarchy, in the ontology for that concept. And the final thing to talk about is SNOMED CT reference sets, of which there are 3 main types. The simple reference set is what we would know as a value set in FHIR. That's sort of notionally, it's a subset, some collection of concepts. Simple maps are just from this concept to this other concept, or to this other value. In fact, it could be another code system entirely. And we use those internally for attribute values. So we could say, why is this concept being inactivated? We'll give you a value for that. What's its replacement going to be? So we have a historical association, and language reference sets are also simple maps, really. But if we need more information than that, then we can move over and use a complex map. And we need that when there are extra rules, for example, the map to ICD-10. So it might make a difference to the mapping whether the patient is male or female. You could get a different response. SNOMED generally doesn't worry about such things, but in the ICD-10 map, it could make a difference. Okay, and that concludes our second learning objective. Right, moving on, Dion very briefly mentioned Expression Constraint Language, or ECL. And this is my favorite feature of SNOMED CT. This is just such a powerful thing. It's sort of our answer to SQL Select. How am I going to find a set of concepts? And these are the most common operators. They'll cover probably 95% of your use cases. There are other operators for ancestors, immediate parent and child. There's a reverse operator, which is a little bit tricky, and we have cardinality as well. So you can actually say, I want to know when there are 5 of these attributes, or I want to know where these attributes don't exist at all. And we have logical operators as well. And where this becomes really useful for defining FHIR value sets is that if you have defined your value set using ECL, using a selection, you don't then need to go back and update that value set when SNOMED changes. If they're adding 800 new concepts every month, so extra values could appear in your selection. And if you've not nailed your value set down, if you've not enumerated every value, you've instead used ECL or some sort of selection criteria, then that value set's values will change over time. As new concepts come in, you don't need to curate and work out, oh, this has changed, so I better redefine my value set. You'll just pick up the new ones. So generally, that's a good thing. It might be that you don't want it to behave like that. And in that case, in your value set, you would specify the exact version of your SNOMED extension that you want that value set to be expanded against. So here's an example of ECL. In this one, I've said, I'd like to see all sorts of medicinal products where you have some sort of ingredient that is caffeine. And I've specifically said, I want to know where there is some sort of strength information present, and that means that I won't return abstract groupers. So I'm just going to get my actual drugs. Now the text, these are actually the FSNs between the pipe symbols, they're entirely optional. So this gets really tight and concise when you remove those. But for those of us who haven't memorized 360,000 10-digit numbers, we do like it to be there. And that apparently was learning objective 3. So that's the logical structure of SNOMED CT. And I've mentioned briefly some language support as well. There are other languages in the SNOMED family of languages, which we may talk about at another time. Moving on to SNOMED International support for FHIR, we have built a Snowstorm Terminology Server, which is open source. And that has support for most of the FHIR resources and operations. And as of earlier this year, we've added support for other code systems. So that would, it's a happy library-based system, where at least the FHIR part of it is. So you can pretty much load anything that you could load onto Happy Server. But that would most obviously be ICD-10 and LOINC. Okay. And there's an experimental version of it as well, Snowstorm X, which is also on our GitHub site. And that has recently had support for post-coordinated expressions added into it. So you can upload those, validate them, classify them, and query against them. Now, this is open source software. It's primarily used for our own internal uses. It's not commercially supported, but we do try and respond to queries on the GitHub site fairly quickly. Okay, and this is one of the applications that we run internally. This is our authoring platform that our clinical terminologists use to maintain SNOMED content. Now, in green here, you can see these are actually concrete values. This is something that was added a couple of years ago. So a relationship, as well as being from a concept to another concept, can be to a number, and that's very useful for writing expression constraints. So I can ask questions like, tell me all the drugs that have more than one ingredient, or tell me all the drugs that have less than 100 milligrams of aspirin in them, which is useful if you were looking for blood thinners rather than analgesics. Yeah, that covers that. Okay, so can I ask, is anyone actively using SNOMED at the moment? Is there anyone maintaining terminology with it? Right, is anyone doing analytics? Rob, and is anyone using it in patient records? Right, is anyone using it for anything else that I didn't call out? What's your use case, sir?
I've tried to use data log and SNOMED to write rules.
Okay. Well, maybe we could talk about that later. Yeah. That'd be good. Right. So that was pretty much what I wanted to say about SNOMED. Moving on to look at how SNOMED CT is used with FHIR. These are your main terminology resources and the operations. And since this is covered elsewhere, I'm really going to focus on the areas of these operations where SNOMED CT has some particular interest. So here's one in code system lookup. This is when I want to find some more information about a code. We used to do a little cheeky thing where we just allowed you to not specify the system. You could just put the code in, but since we now support multiple code systems, we can't get away with that anymore. So I had to update these slides to make sure that the system was always presented. And you can specify the version. So this is the core module ID. This is the international editions module and a particular version. And if we were to look that up, we'd get a 404 back because that's the code for COVID. And in 2019, summer of 2019, we were blissfully unaware that that existed. So you get a 404 back from there. But the interesting one is this property at the end, the normal form. And HL7 have a page about the SNOMED terminology, and these are all listed out, the properties that are unique to SNOMED, among other things. So the normal form is how you would get the attributes, the relationships back in a FHIR sort of way. And this is a fairly complex example because drugs are complicated. This is a 500 milligram paracetamol tablet. And there you can see there's the strength there, 500, and the count of ingredients is up there is 1. And there's a hash in front of the number there. That's a bit of type information because some of these strengths can be very large. You can have millions of units. So we want to make sure you're not going to mix that up with a SNOMED CT identifier. So the hash there proves that it's a number. And you see that most of the space there is taken up with the term, with the English name for that concept. Once that gets taken out, this is really concise, machine readable, very easy to parse, but absolutely impossible for a human being. Yeah. Now, something that FHIR does really well is it says a SNOMED concept is a SNOMED concept. It doesn't worry about the fact that, oh, that's in the Swedish edition or that's been posted here or there. And we've tried to carry that through into our own URI standard. Now, URIs are just unique identifiers. You don't have to be able to follow them. They don't have to be dereferenceable. But we thought that that was a good thing to be able to do. It's just polite manners. If you've got a URL, you expect it to go somewhere. So I've got an example here. I'm just going to hide my control bars. And if I click through on that, okay, let's make that a little larger. All right, we get our value back here. And if we scroll down, we'll see that that is, in fact, American cheese. So, where are you? American cheese. Yep, so that has come from the US edition. So we don't worry about where that is. If we know about it on the server, then we will return it. And if we don't have that concept loaded for whatever reason, because not every country gives us their content or wishes us to have their content in our server. Then there's some namespace information that's embedded in a SNOMED identifier, and we'll look that up instead and at least tell you where that concept originated from. Now, I said that the relationships could be extremely simple. So the normal form there for that concept just gives the parent. There's no other attributes to that concept. Right, another strength of SNOMED CT is our support for internationalization and multi-language support. So here I've loaded a value set onto the server, allergy and tolerance code. And I'd like to expand that. But I'm telling FHIR to ignore whatever code system version that was originally in that value set. And instead, I'd like it to expand against the Swedish edition. I'd like my display language to be in Swedish. And if it can't find the Swedish one, fall back to English. And I'd like to filter down on pollen. So there are the values in that value set which have the word pollen in them. Right. Now, this is one of the coolest features of FHIR because it's using my favorite feature of SNOMED, which is to have an implicit value set, which has some ECL in it. So in this one, I'm asking to return all procedures which have a procedure site of heart structure. And if I was to click through on that, then I would get about 1,800 concepts back. And this has in fact increased since the first time I presented this slide, there were 1,190. So I'm going to filter that down a bit again and ask for the MRI. And that's a much more reasonable 26 concepts. All right, so where all of this is going is, if I was to want my application to be performant, clinically safe, and context sensitive, I'm going to show you how value sets, implicit value sets can help you with that. So this is an application that you can go to, snomed.org/UI. And here, in this application, there's a box there which will take a procedure site. And when I start typing in that box, after I've typed 3 letters, because you don't know what someone's saying until they've typed 3 letters, then we make an expansion call, which has dropped off the bottom of the screen, I'm afraid. We make an expansion call to an implicit value set where I say, give me all procedures. So that keeps my context very tight. And that makes it safe because I'm not searching all of SNOMED. I'm not going to find something in the wrong hierarchy. I'm going to filter it down to just those that I'm interested in, so that the user isn't seeing thousands of results. So that is going to make your application clinically safe and performant and context relevant. Okay, so hopefully we've covered all of our learning objectives now. There's some hot off the press news. For many years, SNOMED International and LOINC have been blocked from having overlapping content. We've now found a way to get around the table and start working together, which is extremely exciting for everyone concerned. We had a pilot in April where we modeled 100 terms, and I'm now working on 26,000, which hopefully we're going to finish off next week and put that into a browser to look at. And here's the example. This is a LOINC test. And you can see that the SNOMED CTID and the LOINC code exist together. And this lends itself very well to a codable concept. This is the same logical entity. This is LOINC's intellectual property. It's just been modeled as a SNOMED CT concept. And those are in fact, so in a codable concept, you have the same thing, but it has 2 different codings in each code system. Okay, so last thing is a shout out to the SNOMED on FHIR working group, which Rob Housen co-chairs with me. This is very much an equal partnership between SNOMED International and HL7. We meet every other Tuesday at a very reasonable time in the US, very unreasonable time in Australia. And we have some great experts who lead that discussion. You can look at our Confluence site there, snomed.org/FHIR, and you're very welcome to join those calls. That is for the benefit of anyone who's interested in working with SNOMED and FHIR together. Okay. Good for questions.
Brilliant presentation, Peter, as ever. On the query there with the ECL query plus the text filter, couldn't you put the text filter within the ECL query itself?
Using
the latest versions of ECL.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that leading question. Yes, there was also something, so you can have your text filter directly in your ECL, and there are other properties that you can query on: the active state, the effective time, and so on. Another feature that's been added most recently is the historical relationships. You can sort of work those backwards and say, so this is what my value set looks like now with these active concepts. I want you to work backwards from the historical associations and pull in all the things that use that as a replacement. So the old concepts get pulled in as well. So that's really useful for your historical analytics. Thank you. First one's on me.
You mentioned this Snowstorm Terminology Server. Yes. There's also this Welcome Onto server. Where's the difference? What are the differences? Are there more features? Is this paid version of Snowstorm?
Right. Onto server is better. It's a fully paid up product. It's quite expensive. They have massive support for FHIR. Snomed International, we don't use FHIR internally, and so generally we've just done what people have asked us for. We haven't had anyone ask us to do R5 yet, for example, so we're still on R4. That although that is something that our chief technology officer is keen for us to work on.
Hi, thanks. So is the SNOMED content, how is that licensed or delivered? So is it a hosted service, or can you load it into yourself, into your own running Snowstorm? Or?
So it is a licensed product. The 48 countries that are members of our organization, everyone in that country or it gets the right to work with that content for free. Yeah, there are affiliate licenses, and a free license can be given out if you have some sort of research use case.
So if you live in the country,
I'll check that. I'll check that. It is free to use in those countries.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, your country has paid for it. Like in the UK, the NHS has made that available. So you can go to the NHS. They have their own version of the browser and so on.
It's a hosted service?
Right.
Or
This is the second part of your question.
Okay.
You can download that as a zip file. And these are basically they're text files that lend themselves to being loaded into a relational database. Now, this is actually a graph structure, right? So you can put it into some sort of graph database, but it is also can be expressed in tables. So you have your concept table, your description table, your relationship table with foreign key relationships between those. So you can either go old school or new school on the content when you get hold of it. And so you've got the international edition, and then the extensions, countries will add in whatever is unique to their country. So you can sort of load the international into your database and then put an extension on top of it. Some countries package the whole thing together. So the US, for example, they just give you an edition, which includes the international content and their extension. And if we see that, or if countries tell us that they're interested in content that is in another country, we say, well, this is common. Well, that becomes international at that point. So we can promote that up and it will appear in the international edition. Thank you.
Time for one final question. I don't know who was first, but.
Okay, I've had some trouble with working with SNOMED CT in the context of writing implementation guides because there's not a very good support for like the cool things you show here with ETL and language support. It's not very easy to get access to from a perspective where you're writing an implementation guide. So I would just like to ask you what kind of work is going on there.
That is very true. I know that Cicero are working specifically on that terminology support for the tooling, for the HL7 tooling. And once they've cracked that nut, we'll probably follow on and ask them how they did it. Yeah. Okay, was that our last question?
Yes, it's quite a past.
Right.
So unless anyone wants to keep us any further from the drinks. Questions? No? Thank you very much, Peter, for a very nice presentation. Slightly less fearful now. So thanks for the first day at the conference. Enjoy the socials, which is, of course, maybe the most important part. And see you for the next sessions tomorrow again.
Thank you.